We are here. It is officially week 1 of the 2024 NFL season, so that means it's time to hit those waiver wires to find players that could add value to the back end of your rosters. First and foremost, I want to highlight just a couple of players that are very highly rostered, but they're not exactly 100% rostered that I think need to be, and that includes Jacoby Brissett, quarterback for the New England Patriots, Jordan Mason, running back for the San Francisco 49ers, Jalen Tolbert, wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys, and Greg Dulcich, tight end for the Denver Broncos. Again, all of these guys are rostered very, very heavily in over 95% of dynasty leagues, but not exactly 100%. So double check your waiver wires and immediately add these guys if they are available. All right, now I'm not going to try to even begin to understand what the Browns are doing with Deshaun Watson and his whole contract situation, but one thing I do know is that Watson has not been the most impressive nor the healthiest quarterback over the past 2 years. In fact, Watson has been dealing with a shoulder injury for almost all of training camp, the same injury that he's been recovering from since having surgery last year. So if Watson were to get hurt again or just look terrible in general, Jameis Winston could have a very solid opportunity to regain a starting role and potentially fight for an actual starting job for 2025. And this is a pretty talented offense in Cleveland. Winston would be thrown to Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, and David Njoku, and we know his affinity for just chucking the ball around the field can lead to some pretty big play potential for fantasy football. I would not at all be shocked if Jameis Winston become a very viable backup quarterback who has startable weeks for fantasy football this year and could honestly be this year's Joe Flacco on the same team, no less. Next up at the running back position, I have been on the Trey Sermon hype train for quite some time now as the direct handcuff to Jonathan Taylor, so you know I have to take the chance to quickly highlight him now as a waiver wire add. Taylor has struggled to play a full season 2 years in a row now, missing 6 games in 2022 and 7 games in 2023. We saw how valuable Zach Moss was in this handcuff role last year on what is more or less the same offense now, but Moss is gone, and who's the clear handcuff for 2024? Trey Sermon. And it's gross, I understand, but we saw Sermon play in this offense once last year in over 35% of snaps, and in that game, he racked up 88 yards on 17 carries. He didn't catch any passes, but any running back seeing 17 touches is a near must start for fantasy football, especially if we're in middle of the season with bye weeks and injuries just crushing us. You cannot overlook a valuable handcuff like Trey Sermon if he's still sitting on waivers. But speaking of valuable handcuffs, the Chiefs have been making headlines for the running back room behind Isaiah Pacheco recently, with the preseason darling of Carson Steele beating out Deneric Prince, plus the new acquisition of Samaje Perine after he was cut by the Broncos. Now, if you Google the Chiefs depth chart, you might still see Clyde Edwards-Helaire listed as the RB2, but I think we all know that that's basically a formality right now, and it really does feel like both parties just need a fresh start away from each other. So as the season goes on, I would expect that Samaje Perine would be taking over the complement role to Isaiah Pacheco, possibly even taking on the same Jerick McKinnon role as a pass catcher that we've seen the past couple of years. And Steele has made a name for himself that he could be a goal line back or just have an interesting role in general if Isaiah Pacheco were to get hurt. So both of these guys are definitely worth picking up. Last on the running back list today is another intriguing RB2 and RB3 duo from the Cleveland Browns. Now, originally, D'Onta Foreman was cut by the team during roster cutdowns, but then was re-signed like a day later to add to Pierre Strong as the backups behind Jerome Ford while Nick Chubb is on PUP. Personally, I believe that D'Onta Foreman is the better running back, and I would anticipate that he would be the main beneficiary of any Jerome Ford injury prior to Nick Chubb returning, but both of these guys are worth a quick add now just to see what happens before Nick Chubb comes back. All right, moving to the wide receiver position, we have to start with the Washington Commanders receiving core behind Terry McLaurin now that Jahan Dotson has been shipped off to Philadelphia. My initial reaction to this was that this was just a huge plus for Dyami Brown, who had some really nice catches during the preseason, and that he would be the primary beneficiary of the Dotson trade, not Olamide Zaccheaus or Luke McCaffrey yet. And I still think that he's worth a pickup, but I'm just less excited now in Dyami Brown because of the addition of Noah Brown. If you remember, Noah Brown has actually been a really good fill-in at different points of his career on 2 different teams. In 2022, Brown was the wide receiver 2 for the Cowboys after Amari Cooper got traded, and he actually posted 6 double-digit fantasy weeks on the back of 7 games with 6 or more targets. He actually averaged 4.5 receptions for 68.5 receiving yards over the first 4 weeks of the season, and then last year, Brown filled in for multiple weeks for an injured Nico Collins or Tank Dell and posted 3 weeks with 80-plus yards, 2 of which were actually over 150 receiving yards, and he caught 2 touchdowns in those 3 games as well. So now in Washington, I actually believe that Noah Brown is the second best receiver on this Commanders team, and I think that he has a great opportunity to be a deep threat for Jaden Daniels. I still think Dyami Brown is well worth an add, but I'm just personally more excited for Noah Brown in this role. The next wide receiver too I need to highlight is Van Jefferson, now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this is a very similar argument as Noah Brown, a kind of journeyman wide receiver who's actually been a really solid injury replacement, now has an opportunity to be a full-time starter on a new team. That is precisely what Van Jefferson is this year. He is the clear-cut wide receiver 2 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, most especially with Roman Wilson being sidelined by injury. But even when Roman Wilson returns, I believe Van Jefferson is just a better player. Over his 4-year career, Jefferson has averaged 11.5 fantasy points per game in games where he's seen at least 6 targets. That is more than enough to warrant a stash at the back end of your bench for the start of the season, just to really see the type of target share that Jefferson can have as the wide receiver 2 in Pittsburgh. If it's not really coming together, you can quickly cut him early on in the season for somebody better, but as for right now, I think you have to pick up Van Jefferson if he's available. But speaking of, here's his averages in games with X amount of targets or more, the poster child for that type of stat line all summer long has been Greg Dortch for the Arizona Cardinals. And I was honestly very surprised by how available Dortch still is, as it seems like he's been the late round darling for best ball players all year long. He's been highlighted in basically every Dynasty Stash video or article this year, but here he is, available in hundreds of leagues out there right now. The thing that makes Dortch so interesting is his locked-in role as the wide receiver 3 for the Arizona Cardinals, especially with Zay Jones getting hit with a 5-game suspension. Dortch was also lighting up training camp all season long with clips all over my timeline, and he is a very good route runner and just overall receiver in general. So if he is still available in your leagues, please add him. And to cap off the wide receivers, I wanted to just quickly rapid fire some already highly rostered players, but just reinforce my enthusiasm for adding each one of them. Number 1, Malik Washington is currently one of technically 5 Dolphins receivers on the active roster, and his only real competition for slot receiver snaps on the team is Braxton Berrios. Washington was my favorite late round receiver in the entire 2024 class because he's just so insanely talented. He was uber productive in college in 2023, forced the most missed tackles in all of college football, and was the number 2 ranked rookie by PFF grade behind only Malik Neighbors in college last year. And now he's on the Miami Dolphins in a Mike McDaniel offense, so yeah, he's well worth the add if he's still available. The second is Jacob Cowing, another one of my favorite late round guys and has been massively underrated all year long. Cowing has been another preseason darling and has really made the most of his opportunity with Brandon Ayuk sitting out and Ricky Pearsall being hurt all summer. And again, Cowing also finds himself in a Shanahan offense on one of the best teams in the league, so another player that is well worth a pickup if he's still available. And the third player is Jordan Whittington, another player who has seemingly come out of nowhere as another preseason darling this year, but of course was found by Sean McVay as the second coming of Puka Nacua. Okay, maybe he's not at that level, but he has certainly become a very interesting name to stash, with Puka Nacua already dealing with an injury, Cooper Kupp dealing with injuries for 2 years in a row, and just getting up there in age. And did I mention that Whittington is in a McVay offense on one of the best teams in the league? So another wide receiver, very much worth the stash if he is available. And lastly, to touch on 2 tight ends to add right now, I am intrigued by the potential opportunities for both Gerald Everett and Zach Ertz on brand new teams in 2024. Everett has actually been out snapping and out targeting Cole Kmet during the preseason on snaps that Caleb Williams and the first team offense have played. So if this usage really continues into the regular season, Everett could be a sneaky streaming option, or at least a touchdown dependent option to throw into your starting lineup if you're desperate for a tight end starter. Then as for Zach Ertz, he has once again found himself playing alongside a way more exciting, potentially breakout young tight end, but that hasn't stopped him before, and I don't know if it's going to stop him again in 2024. This Commanders offense is desperate for pass catchers, as there are just a lot of names here with no real extensive histories for production except Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz. I don't really expect Ertz to hold on to the tight end 1 role for long, as I do think Sinnott is just going to force his way onto the field, but until that happens, Zach Ertz could have sneaky every week starter appeal, just like he did for the Arizona Cardinals last year before getting hurt, and he is well worth an add if he's available. But if you're wondering which players you could drop from your roster to add some of these guys, I just made a video talking through roster cloggers and players that I would be okay dropping in Dynasty, so you can check that video out right up here.